All right, here we go. It is that time of the week again for the Global Bob Show. The Global Bob Show, we are the crossroad of technology and politics. Man, listen to that rock and roll music. As always, it gets me fired up and ready to put on a show. This is episode number 24, Zero Trust. I'd like to thank everybody that tunes in every week, of course. I'd like to thank those that spread the word about the show. As always, you can reach out to me on Facebook through our Global Bob Show Facebook group, or on Twitter at Global Bob Show, of course on Gmail, globalbobshow@gmail.com. It's so good to be here in the Richard Cook broadcast facility. I really enjoy putting these together. Sometimes I don't record there, as you guys and gals heard that I was out in Vegas a couple weeks ago, so we recorded a show out there, and it was nice. Had a nice view of the pool and everything, but really, I like to be in here where it all began, in the Richard Cook broadcast facility. So I'd like to thank a buddy of mine that reached out to me over the weekend. He said that he was doing some work outside, and he was catching up on the Global Bob Show, and he came across an episode that sounded like the conversation that him and I had. So he hit me up on Signal and said, "Wait a second, that was me, wasn't it?" I said, "Sure enough." So that's where I get a lot of my inspiration for these shows, is people that call or text and they ask me a question. So as always, I think, well, if they had the question, then maybe some other people have the question, so why not put out a show on it? So I really appreciate him listening to the show and reaching out. So with that, we got the old Cyber Caddy fired up, made its way here to the studio. So let's dive right on into this. But before we dive in, let me just stop here for a second. Now, I used application that I was communicating with my buddy. Now, he is a technologist himself, and so him and I, our preferred method of communications, if it's via text, we use Signal. So for some of my audience listeners that are not familiar with Signal, Signal is an application that you can download on your phone. They also have one you can download on your computer. I don't recommend the computer version of Signal. I prefer the ones on the device, which we can get into that more later. But basically, it is end-to-end encrypted. Now, end-to-end encryption means that whenever I send him a message, it's encrypted on my device, and that message stays encrypted as it goes through the cellular network and various IP networks, and it comes down to his particular device, whether he's using his iPad or iPhone or Android tablet or phone, and then it's decrypted. Now, one of the reasons why I like to use Signal is you can go out there and do a lot of research, but it's pretty secure. A lot of folks use like iMessenger, and Google has their equivalent of something like that. Now, they do encryption on it, but if you don't trust the phone manufacturers or the people that are providing that service, then Signal is really good. You can also do encrypted phone calls with Signal. So it would take and encrypt your voice traffic, and you can have a regular phone conversation over Signal. So I'm not saying that if you're into some kind of nefarious business that, if you use Signal, then there's no way anybody can eavesdrop on that information. But for all intent and purposes, it is a pretty good platform to use, and that's what we use here at the Global Bob Show. One other thing I'll say about Signal is that if you're worried about, say, your significant other, or if you're worried about somebody having another device on your network. I mean, we've talked about this in the past, where one of the ways that people read other people's messages is that they'll find their old iPad, or they'll find, a device and put them on there for like iMessenger. So every time you send an iMessage, it pops up on that device. Now that's a way that, we've seen how people stalk people using that type. So with Signal, you can't really do that, because if someone was to attempt to do that, then all parties that are involved with that Signal conversation will get an alert saying that the other person's device number has changed, and please verify. So anyways, I know we kind of went off on a tangent on Signal, but it's a really good application. And if you really are paranoid, you can do things like turn on the disappearing messages. So if I send you a message or you send me a message, after it's read, it disappears after a certain amount of time. So really good platform. I just want to put that out there. If you all are looking for an alternative that's really simple and that is encrypted and secured, then I would recommend Signal. So while we're talking about Signal, this is a great segue into what we were actually going to talk about today, and that is zero trust. Now, as I mentioned, most of my inspiration for these shows come from people calling me throughout the week and asking me questions. Well, on this particular one, I've been working on a project for quite some time using a application called Zero Tier. So there's a little plug there for Zero Tier. While I was out at DEF CON, I met up with the Zero Tier folks, and I use the Zero Tier technology as a way to establish zero trust. So what is zero trust? Now, back in the day, when we had all these computer networks and everything was interconnected, you would come to someone's office or their home and you would ask, hey, what's the Wi-Fi password so I can get on here? And this is really a problem for corporations. So people would come in, they would get on the Wi-Fi network so they can, check their email and surf the web, or if they're a vendor, maybe they need to download some drivers to fix your copy machine. So once they were on that network, then they were on there as if they were someone that worked in that corporation, right? It was all kind of a flat network. We've talked about flat networks and IP subnetting and stuff in other episodes. But what started to happen is that there were some breaches that made the news. I mean, one of the major ones was Target. And Target, the grocery store chain, had fallen victim to a highly sophisticated cyber operation. And it was discovered that adversary had gained access to Target's main network through the HVAC. So people that aren't familiar with the term HVAC, that's basically the air conditioning system and heating systems at the Target store. And what had happened is that those devices needed to be monitored, and so they just put them on the network. Well, when someone came in, an adversary came in and was able to compromise the HVAC system network and then jump over. And that's really when this zero trust, to me, I started hearing a lot about it. Now, like I said, back in the day, and your house is probably like this, and probably a lot of small businesses are like this, you have firewall on your perimeter, right? And that firewall is blocking things that are coming in from the internet. We've talked about in previous podcast episode the whole idea of how an adversary lands on a network, right? They have to land and then expand. And that's why we get a lot of spam emails, because once you click on a link or you go to a site, your computer is going out into the wild west of the internet, and then there's bidirectional communication. So that whole land and expand is what zero trust tries to mitigate. So like I said, someone comes to your house, they're on your network, and they can get to wherever. It's kind of like back in the day where they had the cartoon and it said, how many licks does it take to get to the Tootsie Roll center of a Tootsie Pop? Well, then the person takes a big bite and says, the world will never know. So all these layers of defense have traditionally been from the outside coming in. But once you're in that soft, gooey center, and you can move laterally across the networks. And so with that type of security model, that's kind of like the castle and the moat, right? So once you're inside the castle, they check you out at the door, you come in and you can move around. But now, as we mentioned in other podcast episodes, is cryptoware, ransomware, crypto viruses. That's what's happening. They're getting on these networks and they're expanding. And so with the zero trust model don't think of it as a piece of software, and don't think of it as just something that you install. It's more, it actually is a methodology for the way of setting up networks. Now, you can dig down into the zero trust model and get as deep as you want, but the best way to think about zero trust and setting up networks in a zero trust model is kind of like the classification of documents and people that access those documents. So you got someone that needs access to classified information. What do? They check them out. They may do a background check. They want to make sure they actually have a need to know. And so then once they get access to that, then they get what they call least privileged access, which is access to just the documents they need. So the government, they've gotten it right. They've been doing this for quite some time, but it's with like physical folks accessing physical systems. So with the zero trust model, when you start setting it up, you look at the devices that are coming in and out of your network. And a good example of this is these IoT devices. I call them the Internet of Toys, even though it's called the Internet of Things. But a lot of these devices that are being put on the network, they really don't need to have access to every other part of your network. So if you take your typical security system that's at someone's office, well, if a guest comes in and asks, hey, what's the Wi-Fi password? They get on the Wi-Fi network, they can get to those security cameras. Those security cameras can get to, say, the file server. But when you implement the zero trust model, you take those security cameras and you, through software or through firewalls and various applications, you limit their access to say those security cameras are just recording footage. That footage is going to the security camera DVR server that's, it could be at your place of business or it could be up in the cloud, but you put controls around those security cameras to say those cameras can only communicate with that DVR server. There's no reason for anybody to communicate on a regular basis directly with the security camera. And when you do that, what you've done is lowered the potential for that security camera to be part of your breach. Now, that's something that's very, very common. These security cameras, these IoT devices, we mentioned with Target, the HVAC control system, these computers that are, managing these systems, even the little cheap security cameras, most of them are running full-on operating systems that have, a lot of other things in there that aren't necessarily needed for security cameras. So that's why they become a real ripe target because, one, there's no security antivirus. I mean, there are some things like if you get into the real high end where you could put some clients on there, but let's just say for all intent and purposes, you don't have antivirus on security cameras. You don't log into a security camera and have a firewall. So what you're doing is you're creating a barrier around there. So one, those security cameras, if say the manufacturer, which is a big deal, we'll probably do a whole nother podcast on source code supply chain integrity. But a lot of these cameras and IoT devices, they're coming from overseas. And so they could already be pre-installed with malware or other systems that allow for backdoor access. So if that is the case and you're implemented your zero trust model, then those cameras will not be a threat because they can't go anywhere. Now, I know that I really, like to use examples that are way out there with a security camera, but if you bring it in a little bit closer and you think about the people that are at your office that have access to your network, right? I know that most people that I talk to on a regular basis, my small business owners, they don't have anything internally. So that's limiting the communications from computer to computer. That's why I get the crypto virus call a couple times a month. Hey, we don't know where it came from, but all the computers we walked in, well, instantly, there's probably not a zero trust model implemented. But when you think about the computers on your network, think about the people that are using those computers. Do they really need to have unfeathered access to your network? A lot of times there are situations where really the only thing that one computer needs to talk to on the network that needs to kind of be open is a printer, because now most people that I know, they're using SharePoint and Microsoft Office and Google Docs, and so all of their information is stored up in the cloud. And there's really not a reason for, say, Bobby's computer to talk to Jimmy's computer, because there's no transactions happening, right? Bobby's stuff's all up in the cloud. Jimmy's stuff's all up in the cloud. So when you get to your office, and if you can, ping another computer on the network, then chances are you're not set up in a zero trust model. And why is that a big deal? Like we mentioned with the crypto viruses, it is a big deal. So something that you all can do, I like to give everyone, little easy things they can do to lower their victim potential, is to turn on what they call client isolation. Now, this isn't the full implementation of a zero trust model, but it's a way to get the computers isolated, which is called client isolation. And most of the time, your Wi-Fi routers and your business routers, even my home router does this. You just click client isolation, and that way, those folks that are isolated, they can only get directly out to the internet. And therefore, if they download some malware onto their computer, they're not going to be able to spread it around your house. Now, most of you all that have routers at your house or at your office, you probably do have a guest Wi-Fi network. And when you bought the router, it says, hey, do you want to have guest Wi-Fi? You click the OK button. And most of the time, the behind the scenes, what the manufacturers of those routers are doing are essentially creating another network that has client isolation. So your guests get on that network and they can only get out to the internet. But what you want to be careful of, you don't want to just willy-nilly turn this thing on, because say at your house, if you need to access your television or you need to access other peripherals on your network, if you turn on client isolation, you won't be able to get to it. So think about if you want to take some preliminary steps, just create a Wi-Fi network, turn on guest isolation. And then just because it's called a guest network doesn't mean it just has to be used for guests. So going back to the office network, right? So you have this guest Wi-Fi. Think of it more as like a untrusted device network. And so if you have somebody at your office that all they need to do is access the internet and Google Docs, and they don't need to access anything else at that office, just put them on the guest network. Now, about the only thing I will say you do have to tune a little bit is that if you have like an office printer, like a network printer, and they need to be able to print to that, then you would need to put in some rules to do that. So think of the zero trust model is basically a way to put devices on your network and specify directly of what resources they should have access to. Now, zero trust is all the rage And so, as always, I like to give a little bit about how did we get here. So it's one of those buzzwords that I can tell you now, if I'm cruising the internet, some of these technical sites, I'll get all kinds of advertisement for zero trust. And like I said, it's not a piece of software. It's more of a methodology, of which I highly support. But it's not new, right? So in 1994, a guy by the name of Stephen Marsh, he coined the phrase zero trust at the University of Stirling. Now, if you think about it, 1994, we've talked about this in other podcasts of, how the internet came to be and when people started using the internet. So this guy, he was already thinking about zero trust back in 1994. Now, that's before, a lot of offices were networked and everybody had a computer on their desk. So going forward, we find out in 2010, Joseph Kervag of the Forrester Group. Now, Forrester, they're a research and analyst arm, and so if you're involved with cybersecurity, then Forrester is a big deal. But what he did was he started laying down stricter policies and stricter frameworks for zero trust in 2010. And then, of course, in 2018, the government's cybersecurity research folks of the NIST. Now, if you're not familiar with NIST stands for the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and these are the brainiacs that work for the government. So they started talking about this zero trust and how it should be implemented. And then in 2019, the UK's National Cybersecurity Center, they actually started recommending that network engineers and network professionals start down this zero trust model. Now, like a lot of technology, we have a lot of visionaries that started this and had the vision of a zero trust way before it became cool. So from 1994 up until 2019, that was kind of the incubator times for this zero trust. And then we all know what happened with COVID. Right? Everybody went home. You had all these folks that were interconnecting. And now zero trust became even more important because you have company resources at people's houses on their home network. And, the companies don't know, could the laptop or device become infected on the home network? And then when they VPN into the corporate network, they spread that the viruses. And so for network administrators, this was a rough thing, right? How do you have these devices that are on these, you want to call it all intent and purposes a dirty network, and now they're going to come onto your corporate network virtually, and you want to make sure that you limit what those devices could access. So I know in industry, a lot of my friends, they started going through like, holy moly, how do we protect against this? It's one thing if they got their laptop and every now and again, they work from home and stuff, but now you got people full time working from home. And I don't want to get into too many technicalities of this, but another major thing that happened when everybody started working from home, they had a huge increase of traffic coming into the corporate network because a lot of the VPNs were set up in what they call full tunnel mode. And full tunnel mode means all the traffic, right? No matter what. If you're going to Google, then that company device was going to make its way through the VPN and go out the corporate firewall to Google. Well, you can imagine thousands and thousands of people working from home. That was something that just did not scale out, because all of their internet traffic was coming through. So they implemented something called split tunneling. And split tunneling, and I want to really tread lightly here and not get too technical, split tunneling meant that the person's working from home, and if they went to Google or any site out on the internet, they would go out through their home connection. But then if they needed to access a company resource, then they would go through the VPN connection, right? So that's called split tunneling. And what made that become a real threat is that now someone could go to a website on their corporate device, and let's say that website had a 0 day on it, so it wasn't detected by the antivirus installed, and so that computer would get compromised. Well, there's also it has a link to the corporate office, and so someone could come down to that device and then tunnel into the network, because it's called split tunneling, right? And so that really had a lot of my friends in industry start thinking, hey, we got to get the zero trust model down. And so one of the programs that I recommend is one called Zero Tier. Now, these guys have been around for a long time. I actually met out with them whenever I was out at Black Hat and DEF CON. I actually met them over on the DEF CON side. And these guys have been doing zero trust for a long time. And also, too, it's a software-defined WAN, which we can get into more of that later. But they really do a good job. I say they do an excellent job for people that don't want to go out and hire a whole big staff to do this zero trust and that just need to have basically folks that are working from home but then come to the office sometimes. So you can download their software and put it on the computer, and what that will do is basically give you a way to implement zero trust. Now, we're not going to get into all the details of it, but if anybody's looking to implement a zero trust network, then I would recommend Zero Tier. So we are approaching the bottom of the half hour here. And as always, I'd like to thank everybody that has rode along here as we cruise the highways and byways of cyberspace. And like I said, sometimes these episodes may dabble a little bit on the technical side, but if you can just take one little small nugget away from each one of these, then I think that I'm doing my job. So just to sum it all up, basically, in the old days, we had the old castle and moat system, and now we need to move to a zero trust system. And very simply is, hey, you can come on in the castle, but we're only going to give you access to the things that you need to have access to, and we're going to block everything else. Pretty simple. And if you need to get to that resource and it's blocked, then your friendly network administrator, I'm sure, will be more than happy for you to put in a request, and they will unblock that resource. And also, too, one of the dividends that zero trust serves, not just to, I'm not saying that you won't ever fall victim to crypto ransomware if you have zero trust, but one of the things zero trust does is allows for you to show your auditors, if your industry is one that is under the the scrutiny of auditors, a lot of times they want to see your firewall rules and how you protect your network. And as soon as you start down the path of you implement a zero trust system, trust me, the auditors are like, okay, these people know what they're talking about, and they can produce whatever artifacts they need during those audits. So, like I said, if anything, implement it at your house on your guest network to let those folks get directly out to the internet and not touch your internet of toys or TVs or anything at your house. And if you're at your small business, just do the same thing and put people on that guest Wi-Fi network until they actually have a business need to get on the other side of the network where they can, have more access to devices and stuff. So, as they say, Rome was not built in a day, and neither was cybersecurity, as we've a testament to during these podcasts. So with that, I will see everybody next week. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, then you can reach out to me via the various channels, and I will try to get back to you as soon as possible. See you.